In this video, we're going to show you how to replace the catalytic converter on your car. Let's get to it. Before replacing your catalytic converter, which is an expensive part on your car, you want to make sure that it actually needs replacing. We've got a separate video on how to diagnose a bad catalytic converter, so if you're not sure if you need to replace it yet, make sure to check it out. We'll put a link to it in the description under the video so you can easily find it. Now it's time to install the new catalytic converter. But before you do, make sure it's the right type. You need to check if it has the same O2 sensor hole, has a compatible mounting bracket if there is one, and matching connector that fits the rest of the exhaust system. A universal catalytic converter like this one shows up when buying catalytic converters online for our Jeep Wrangler, but they don't fit on the stock exhaust. So make sure you verify this before buying, although it sometimes might be difficult to see the catalytic converter without removing the skid plate like in our case. Old exhaust systems are notorious for having very rusted bolts that are a pain to get off, so it's best to spray them down with penetrating oil a couple of times in the days before you remove the catalytic converter. You'll need to spray the bolts on both ends of the catalytic converter. Your car might have a different layout or even have two exhausts with a catalytic converter on each side, but the principle is exactly the same on any car. Soaking the bolts in penetrating oil will help you get the bolts loose, although there's always a chance a rusted bolt breaks off, like in our case. While spraying, we discovered that the bolt at the top of this flange was broken off already, and we've never touched the exhaust system on this car before. The previous owner probably broke one bolt off and then gave up, so this exhaust is going to be perfect to demonstrate how to deal with situations like this. Then the first thing you need to do is lift your car so you can access your exhaust system. We've got a separate video on how to safely lift your car and put it on jack stands, which we'll link to in the description below, so make sure to check it out. On our Jeep, we also have to support the transmission with an additional jack stand before we can remove the skid plate to get access to the exhaust system. Most modern cars since the late 90s have an O2 sensor after the catalytic converter. Carefully remove it with a wrench and hang it somewhere to the side so it won't get damaged. With that out of the way, it's time to remove the catalytic converter itself. Before removing the bolts, you want to remove as much dirt and debris from the threads of the bolts as possible. If you don't, the gunk and rust buildup will clog the threads and make it a lot harder to take the nuts off. Then spray it down one last time with penetrating oil. Now in our case, we're replacing everything behind this connector. So we need to keep this part and make sure we can use this half of the connector again. The easiest way to remove rusted bolts is to use an impact gun, but as you can see, we can't reach the bolts like this. So, to make things easier, we're going to saw the catalytic converter off as close to the connector as possible. This way, we'll be able to use our impact gun to remove the rusted bolts. We're going to destroy our old catalytic converter in the process, but that doesn't matter as we're going to replace it anyway. But of course, make sure you don't cut on the wrong side so you don't destroy the part you're planning on keeping. To cut through the exhaust, you can use an inexpensive handsaw like this. You then want to remove the blade, place the saw upside down around the exhaust and install the blade again with the teeth facing down. This way you can easily put force on it and cut through it a lot quicker. Or you can use our preferred method, which is an electric reciprocating saw with a metal cutting blade. This saves you lots of time and spares you the workout of sawing by hand. But make sure you're wearing snug-fitting safety goggles with a ledge like this so nothing can get behind them. You do not want to get metal shavings in your eyes. Also, it's best to wear ear protection as the high-pitched noise from sawing metal pipes can damage your hearing. Just keep the reciprocating saw straight and let the sawing motion do the work. No need to put a lot of force on it. You'll cut through exhaust like butter without breaking a sweat. And just like that, it's done. With that side off, we now need to remove the bolts on the other side of the catalytic converter. But as you can see, they're really stuck even after having soaked in penetrating oil over the past few days. What you then want to try is using heat. Take a torch and heat the nut until it's smoking hot. Then grab either water or penetrating oil and spray the bolt. This will cool the metal really quickly, which cracks the rust inside the threads, improving your chances of getting it loose without snapping a bolt. We're going to repeat this process a couple of times for both bolts and hope it will be enough to break the rust loose. Something definitely broke loose, but unfortunately it wasn't the rust. This is something that can happen if the nuts or bolts are really rusted and fused together. We're going to replace everything so we don't need to worry about a broken bolt as long as it's loose. The heat trick luckily did work on the other side to get the nut loose. With the nut removed, we can wiggle the catalytic converter off the bolt. Then simply pivot down and slide the support out of the hole. And while our exhaust system literally is a straight pipe, we're obligated to start it so we can hear what that little four-cylinder truly sounds like. This was before with the muffler. Doesn't really sound that nice. And this is with the straight pipe. What a difference. Sounds like it has a much bigger displacement than it actually has. We're now going to try to remove the connector like we did the other bolts. Heat, cool down, repeat. Now we can try to get the bolt loose with our impact gun. You normally want to use it on the nut, which comes off easier, but we can't reach that side unfortunately. To make matters worse, we can't get it loose with an impact gun either. It just strips the head of the bolt because it's that stuck. Because these bolts are so rusted, the correct size socket doesn't fit anymore. You can try to clean them up with a metal brush, but that probably won't be enough. What you then want to do is either use one of those bolt extractor sets that can grip rounded bolts, or simply use a metal file to trim the nut slightly so your socket fits over it. Our last option is to use a breaker bar and break the nut loose or break the nut off so we can remove the connector. The nut starts to rotate, but eventually it lets out a big crunch and breaks off. And as you can see, once again the nut was completely fused with the bolt. No way that would have ever come off the bolt. Luckily, the next one did come off eventually after a long fight. There was no need to remove the third bolt because the previous owner who had attempted this job had given up after that one snapped. You can see the fresh metal from our snapped bolt and the rusted metal on the old snapped bolt from many years ago. The black deposit on the seal is soot from the exhaust fumes that escaped from the connector as it didn't seal properly anymore without that third bolt. Before installing the catalytic converter, clean the old contact area with a scuff pad so the gasket will seal properly. To install the catalytic converter, you'll need to use special exhaust lock nuts behind the catalytic converter because the temperature right after the catalytic converter is much higher than the rest of the exhaust. They're plated with copper to resist corrosion from high heat and prevent seizing. They're also self-locking and won't ever come loose on their own. On the intake, it's enough to use a bolt with a spring washer to prevent the nut from loosening. No need to use special exhaust lock nuts. But remember, the spring washer always needs to be at the side of the nut. Line up the hanger and the bolts at the same time and then slide it in position. Make sure the gasket is correctly in place. There's normally only one way it can fit, so if you've turned it around, you'll notice. Then line everything up and install the bolts. Verify if the spring washer is at the correct side, between the connector and the nut. If everything looks good, tighten the bolts with a wrench. With this connector done, it's time to do the other one. Because this conical-shaped connector needs to settle in order to form a perfect seal, there's a lot of wiggle room around the bolts. You want to cover that gap with a large washer. Then put the exhaust lock nuts on by hand. What you now want to do is tighten the bolts until the connectors almost start making contact, and then continue by doing a couple of turns on each side so the conical exhaust flange tightens evenly. If you fully tighten one side and then the other, it won't ever seal properly. For our car, we didn't need a gasket, but these type of connectors often also have a gasket to make sure it seals perfectly. But don't forget, if your car has an O2 sensor after the catalytic converter, you'll need to reinstall it. That's all there is to it. Now you know how to replace your catalytic converter. And we also have videos on how to replace your entire exhaust system or just your muffler on our channel, so make sure to check those out as well. We've put a link to them in the description under the video so you can easily find them. Thanks for watching. More videos are on the way, so be sure to like, comment, and share this video. It really helps us out a lot. Our content wouldn't be possible without the amazing support of our patrons and YouTube channel members, whose crew you can join via the links in the description to see our schedule, vote on future videos, get behind-the-scenes sneak peeks, and much more. This is Classic Car Maintenance, and we'll see you on the next one.